Hello and welcome to the Blockade Runner podcast. My name is John. Joining me today is Ryan.
Hey.
And this is Blockade Runner episode number 79. And it is unofficially, and I think also going to be officially called Wendig Wednesday, this episode. So, very recently, just over the weekend, the news broke that Chuck Wendig was being removed from all Marvel Star Wars titles. I guess from all Marvel titles. I think he was only doing the Star Wars stuff, but he had essentially been fired from Marvel Comics. And Ryan and I think it was your idea, Ryan, but Ryan and I thought, you know what, we need to do a Chuck Wendig sort of appreciation episode. And so that's what this episode is going to be, Wendig Wednesday. I think that was I think that's how you proposed it to me, right? Like, we got to do a Wendig Wednesday episode. So this vision for this episode kind of appeared to you immediately, Ryan. It just was all there right from the get-go. Is that right?
Yeah. It is born purely out of affinity for his Star Wars work and also passionate anger.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This will be just a little tiny blip, if that, in the Star Wars community and however you want to put it. But I feel like quoting Lor Santeca there, in the beginning of The Force Awakens, like, with this, we've got a chance to set things right. And we're not going to get Chuck his job back, and we're not going to change anybody's opinions out there that have any influence or anything. But I don't know. I like the idea of us at least sitting down and saying, hey, this sucks, and let's talk about all the cool things that Chuck Wendig has contributed to Star Wars in the last couple of years, and hope that he'll continue to do that. So, but we want to open up the episode by talking about sort of what happened, and as far as we know, essentially what took place is that on Friday, the editor for Marvel Comics. What is his name? Mark
Penicia?
Yeah. He called Chuck Wendig and fired him from the Star Wars comic he was working on that we had just talked about, I think, in our probably episode number 77, where we were looking at New York Comic Con news and stuff like that, the publishing panel, and we were talking about the Shadow of Vader comic series, the miniseries, and how excited we were for that, the Friday the 13th homage issue, all that stuff. Anyway, this editor from Marvel called Chuck Wendig and let him know he was being removed from that series, and he would be removed from the upcoming unannounced Star Wars comic that Chuck was going to be working on. So essentially, he was being fired from Marvel, and the reason was because of these are Chuck's words in a tweet that he put up on Friday addressing the issue, because of the negativity and vulgarity of his tweets. That is, according to Chuck, straight from the editor, Mark, too much politics, too much vulgarity, too much negativity on his part. I mean, it's not like, hey, people aren't enjoying your work. It's not, we want to go a different direction creatively. It's just, we don't like the stuff you say on Twitter. And we don't like the fact that you are vulgar on Twitter, and that you address politics on Twitter. And so we are firing you. Ryan, you have some thoughts on that, as do I, but you have some prepared thoughts on that issue.
Yeah. I mean, well, just coming at it as a Star Wars fan, it sucks because, as we'll be getting into like in this episode, Chuck has established a very unique voice within Star Wars, and we're not losing his work through Lucasfilm Publishing. This is just strictly his Marvel work. So there's still the chance that he will write books. But I mean, I don't know. I don't know how pumped he will be about Star Wars. Going forward, I have to imagine this might sour you a bit on it. But I mean, just as a fan, it sucks. Also, because hey, as we just said like 2 episodes ago, we were both really looking forward to the Shadow of Vader miniseries. And then it's like an extra bummer that there was also an unannounced Star Wars book that he was working on. So yeah, I mean, it's less good Star Wars, and it's less good Star Wars from a unique voice. But then like bigger picture here, it's definitely not a very good look for Marvel, considering some of their like highly publicized issues with creators in the past few years, and also not just creators but also trolls, because I guess it's kind of a situation that stems from that. I mean, looking at like what happened at the Marvel Studios level, which is not Marvel Comics, but with James Gunn recently, which I don't even think we need to explain on here because I'm sure you probably have heard that story. But maybe like more low-key stories that kind of flew under the radar were what happened with Heather Antos, who was a editor on the Star Wars books. Basically, she was just relentlessly attacked by sexist and misogynistic trolls on Twitter, and got very little support from the company, it seemed, outside of other creators. And kind of a similar thing happened to Chelsea Kane with her Mockingbird series that riled up some very sad men on the internet, and because of its some of its feminist spins, and that series ended up getting canceled, and she was harassed off Twitter. And it does kind of feel like a victory for those like, I don't know, like, I guess as Chuck would call them, shitty Star Wars fans. Which is possibly the comment that set all this off, because we know that people in like the Comics Gate thing, and over at like Rebel Force Radio, we're really rooting for Chuck to be fired, ever since he called out some of the like just I don't know, just gross elements of Star Wars fandom. And yeah, it almost feels like those guys, you know, the people who are pushing for Star Wars to be by straight white dudes for straight white dudes and starring straight white dudes, like that whole group, it does seem kind of like a victory for them. And that's obviously not what Star Wars is about, and that is not what, you know, modern Star Wars is about. And that really sucks that Chuck kind of took the bullet on that.
Yeah, I would jump in and say I agree 100% with you about that. As far as you put it under notes here, it's letting the assholes win, and yeah, 100% agree. Because the thing is, you know, Chuck Wendig has been Chuck Wendig on Twitter for a real long time, and you know, I don't know much about this editor, Mark Panacea, or I don't know if that's how you pronounce it, but you know, yeah, I mean, you're more educated about Marvel comics and comics in general than I am. I don't know much about him, and so I don't want to say too much about him. Just you know, maybe this is pressure from somewhere else on him, and maybe he's just the guy that had to make the call or something. I don't know, but whatever it is, whoever it is, or whoever collectively it is at Marvel that made this call, I think absolutely it's just giving in to the worst elements of like the online community. I hesitate to even say the Star Wars fan community, because, you know, some of the people that are making calls for this genuinely care about Star Wars, but I think some of them don't even care about Star Wars and just view this as a fertile ground right now that they can wreak havoc in, and sort of try to indoctrinate people and pull people into a certain kind of mindset or whatever, push their political agenda, and Star Wars is a good vehicle to do that right now. I think that's that a lot of the people involved in this are that. But, you know, like you said, Rebel Force Radio, you know, they made a big stink about one of Chuck Wendig's tweets a few months back or over the summer, and that's what sort of kicked a lot of this off. But Chuck was making political tweets and being very open about his feelings and very sort of raw and honest about his perspective on things long before that. You know, I've been following him on Twitter for a really long time. That's not something new. And I guess what I was trying to say, where I was leading a minute or two ago, is that, you know, I don't think any of this stuff is news to them. Just like when James Gunn was fired, I don't think any of those previous tweets and things were news to the people at Disney or wherever that ended up letting him go. I don't think that stuff was news. I think what happened is, you know, much like people like Heather Antos and Chelsea Kane or Kelly Marie Tran in the past, or whomever was pushed off by harassment and trolling, etc. I think, you know, some of these editors or this editor or, you know, the powers that be at Marvel felt pushed and pressured to remove Chuck Wendig. I mean, that's an assumption I'm making. Some of the tweets Chuck, you know, put out there on Friday and Saturday indicated that maybe, you know, he really did just offend one of these editors, like they really just disagree with his political view. But I don't know. It seems like not news to anybody. You know what I mean? I can't imagine that this editor at Marvel, who was so outraged by these tweets, didn't know that this was the kind of thing that Chuck thought or put out into the world before that happened. It wasn't news. So to me, it just feels like bowing to pressure. And again, it's not Star Wars related. It's not Star Wars content related. It's solely about his personal political beliefs. And to me, you know, that is, I don't know. It's crazy to me. Especially because I want to say too, it's not even really all that political, honestly. I mean, not that he doesn't have political views and not that those aren't clear, but I feel like a lot of the things that people are outraged about are him calling out the worst elements of Star Wars fandom. And then those worst elements of Star Wars fandom who feel called out by his honest commentary about their awful behavior run to the editors at Marvel and say, hey, no, he's saying bad things. And then this is the reaction. And it's like, you know, what's political about that? What's controversial or offensive about a lot of, you know, most of the things most of the statements he would make on Twitter? I feel like it was raw, it was honest, it was vulgar at times, yes, but I just don't know. To me, it's not a genuine reaction to his ideas, and more so a reaction to the fact that certain people got upset about it, probably because they felt rightly called out by his honest commentary. So I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it feels very similar to the James Gunn situation, where like James Gunn had anyone at Marvel ever seen any of his trauma movies, like before Guardians of the Galaxy 1, let alone 2?
Yeah.
Like, Romeo and Juliet is like the most offensive thing you can possibly film. And like that stuff was out there, like, and he didn't hide that. And like, yeah, he was like James Gunn was like a shock artist. Like, he was a trauma director. And then like, but it was as soon as he started making political tweets and calling out like elements of like the Trump administration, that's when people pushed for him to get fired. And it's the same thing with you know, Wendig. Like, his as I'm to understand, I haven't actually read any of his original fiction, but it's not like G-rated fiction, and I wouldn't expect that from him. He's someone who dabbles in like just vulgarity and horror and stuff. So like, yeah, like he had all this published body of work that was there for anyone to see prior, but then it was once he started, you know, as you said, calling out the like elements of like also I hesitate to even call them Star Wars fandom, because it is just like the people who just like these sad, angry dudes who like jumped from like Gamergate to Comicsgate. Like it's whatever. It's this like culture of like incel Republican MRA like people, and yeah, like it. Then it was like as soon as that happened, he became a target, and like like Rebel Force Radio wrote a strongly worded email to his bosses at Lucasfilm, calling for his resignation, and like Comicsgate jumped on that, and there's all these like YouTuber people who are like making videos about how awful he is, and then it's like as soon as like he slipped up, because I think the tweet, as far as I understand, the tweets in question are in regards to the new like the stuff going on with like the Supreme Court, and he had like a pretty vulgar tweet about how that sucks that a sexual harasser is getting elected to the Supreme Court for eternity, which is true. That sucks. And and then that was like what like took him down, I guess.
Yeah. But I would not to split hairs, but I would make a couple of I don't know, I guess corrections or whatever to like some of those statements, like and only because this is how it works. Like any little inconsistency or any little misstatement will then be used against, you know what I mean? Like whatever perspective. Like Rebel Force Radio didn't call for Chuck Wendig to be fired. I haven't looked at that tweet, but it was like, hey, Disney, you should know that your guy is doing this. It's a little more sly than that, just like when they posted a picture of Andy Gutierrez drinking out of her Fanboy Tears mug. It wasn't, hey, all of our followers who we know are, angry about some of these issues surrounding Star Wars fandom. Like it wasn't saying go harass Andy Gutierrez. It was just making it really clear that that's like something they thought should happen. And same thing with that. So I only point that out just because, I'm waiting for the comment on the YouTube video being like, Rebel Force Radio never said that. Well, no, they didn't. They just strongly, but I will say too, I did see that over the weekend, Jimmy Mack from Rebel Force Radio posted a big picture of a big stack of Marvel Star Wars comics and was, posting about how he was happy to support Marvel that day. So I guess you could say he got what he wanted, but he never came right out and said that he wanted it, as far as I know. So just to make
the sign of a true Star Wars fan, only consuming Star Wars out of spite.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And the other thing I want to point out too is like the comparison to James Gunn is apt and valuable, but at the same time, like James Gunn was fired for saying some things, tweeting some things that I think were truly offensive and were truly embarrassing things to have tweeted and said. They were way in the past, but they were actually truly embarrassing. I don't think it's the same thing with Chuck Wendig. I mean, maybe he's got some offensive, fiction out there or whatever, but I haven't heard any mention of that in regards to this situation. It's for having a political opinion and for, I guess, using swear words when expressing that political opinion. But why it is that he should be fired from Marvel Comics because he's got a political opinion that's different from the, trolls running a harassment campaign in Comicsgate or whatever. Like, I don't understand. Like, I don't understand. You know what I mean? It's not one-to-one. And I'm not saying that you were arguing it's one-to-one, but it's really pretty different because most of us can all agree, like, yeah, some of that stuff James Gunn said was pretty ugly and not something that's really appropriate for him to be saying. I don't think it meant he should be fired. It was in the past. He apologized for it. He acknowledged it. It was, again, no surprise.
It was before Disney put out 2 of his movies.
Right. So yeah, I get. I totally. I'm on board with all that. But to me, like, this is even a more ridiculous situation. Where is the awful thing that Chuck said besides expressing the same view at least half of America had, except with a couple swear words in the tweets? I just I don't know. It just does not add up to me, except for if I consider it from the perspective of, hey, we're getting pressure from these online groups who are encouraging us to, let this guy go or whatever. So I think that's what it all comes down to. And it definitely sucks, as we've said a couple times here.
Yeah. And I mean, it also, like, I guess moving away from the, I guess, like, actual situation and moving it back to, like, I guess just as a fan's perspective, like, that puts, like, us in a weird position where we read the Marvel comics, and I've always been pretty happy with those comics. I've been happy with, like, the books that Mark has edited leading up to this point. I was also very happy with the books that Heather Antos had edited. Like, I love the creators who are working on Star Wars books right now. I feel immensely bad for them, that now they are probably having to walk on eggshells with their online presence going forward. I mean, I feel that for all creators at Marvel right now. I can't imagine that is a great feeling for for a creator, just wondering if, like, you're going to be next. And I mean, I think there is something to look at with Marvel as a company. And, like, I don't want to get, like, all Alex Jones conspiracy garbage on here or anything, but, like, Marvel's chairman, Ike Perlmutter, is a, like, noted, like, hardcore Trump supporter and gives the Trump administration a lot of money, and has said some, like, super racist stuff in the past. Look into that, dude. But he's also, like, Trump's go-to guy on veteran affairs. So having, and I don't think it would, like, stretch this far, but, like, that is the company that Marvel is right now. It is run by, like, the chairman and former CEO of the company is, like, a guy who is, like, literally just about part of the current administration. And I think, if things get too noisy, like that, that's the company, that's the boss. Even though I don't think he concerns himself at all with the daily affairs of, like, especially the comic book wing of Marvel.
Yeah.
But that is the company.
Yeah. And I want to joke about how you kind of just, like, wrote George Soros on a chalkboard here. But at the same time, like,
sure,
you might be right. I don't know.
Yeah.
So I don't really want to, but then again, at the same time, it's like, I don't know, because I feel like I don't know Marvel as well as you do, but I think of stuff like is it Miss Marvel and other. I just feel like the overall narrative of Marvel comics and stuff is not, like, pushing a conservative agenda, at least from the layman's perspective that I can tell. Like, even if there's a super sort of conservative, and I mean, like, a radical conservative, not just, like, your average conservative. And actually, you had used the word Republican earlier. I don't think I wouldn't personally conflate, like, the views of a lot of these people with, like, just an average Republican personally. It's a whole nother issue, and we probably don't want to get into political party, not minutiae.
We're not talking about the Trade Federation here.
Well, no, but really,
terrorists.
because it's like, I view, like, the Comicsgate and Gamergate people as a very small sect, growing, but a small group of people who have real harassment and abuse in the forefront of their agenda. And not everybody who's a conservative in America is that way, and I don't want to suggest that.
Of course not.
So when I say that, like, the people running Marvel might be conservative, I mean like ultra conservative and more in line with the thinking of those sorts of groups. Even if that's the case, it doesn't seem like it's really filtering down to, like, the day-to-day of the comic business. So I don't know. But then again, it wouldn't make sense to completely discount that connection either. So
Yeah,
Who
I mean,
knows?
it's just a bunch of like, I mean, this alongside like the James Gunn stuff, and um, there was like, I think it was last year when someone from Marvel was talking about like how diverse books don't sell, and they're moving back to traditional superhero type stuff. But then like the actual content coming from Marvel doesn't necessarily represent that. Like Ms. Marvel by G. Willow Wilson is a like Muslim superhero, and it's wonderful. And you have creators like Kelly Thompson and folks like that, and Tom Taylor, who writes X-Men Red, who's a very, very vocal political person on Twitter, and like he has somehow like avoided all of this. Mark Waid is a creator who has been kind of targeted by these groups, but has like somehow come out unscathed with his career intact and stuff. So like it's not like a super clear like one way or another type thing. In the same way, like like Fox, when Fox had a stake in Lucasfilms, it wasn't like Star Wars stuff was filtered through like Fox News or anything.
Yeah.
Like, but there are these connections, and there's I think there's stuff to like read and look into, like if you're interested. But it's like, I don't know, it's just, as I kind of said earlier, it's just not a good look for Marvel right now, on top of like all of this other stuff.
Yeah.
So it's just a nasty situation.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay. Well, I mean, I think we've kind of covered that as much as we're going to, or as well as we're going to, unless there's anything else that we haven't gotten to that you want to bring up as far as that goes.
I mean, kind of the last thing I want to say is like, again, like I really like Marvel comics. I like, the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I love those movies. I love tons of creators at Marvel, and I have subscriptions to like 12 Marvel books, like yearly subscriptions. And I'm not going to like boycott or cut those ties or anything, but it is like I do have like a stack of Star Wars comics sitting here that just like they're not the most appealing thing for me to read right now. Like it just has left like a nasty taste in my mouth. In the same thing, like if Avengers Infinity War came out like a week after the James Gunn firing, like I don't think I would have been as stoked to go see that movie. Like I think some time and some clarification on this and some steps in the right direction will go a long way. But in the meantime, I think Marvel, for one, like they need to decide, do they stand by their creators or not? And that doesn't mean just like standing by their creators when they have the same views as me, but when creators are being targeted and harassed, do they stand by them? And do they offer their creators a really clear social media policy? Because I know like where I work, we have like, an HR professional development session on, what's appropriate to post on social media when using your name and representing, this company. And like it's very clear to me, like what would be stepping over the line as far as like my employer is concerned. I don't think it is very clear for Marvel creators, which is challenging because these are artists and creators who tend to be outspoken, tend to have political views, and to just be like, what this guy over here is saying, that's fine. But what you said, that's too far. You're fired. Like,
well, yeah, and it's a difficult thing because you and I both work for one employer, and our one employer is of a really different nature than, you know, Marvel Comics or Lucasfilm or whatever. Whereas Chuck Wendig, you know, I don't know everything about the ins and outs of the contracts that he signs and the way he works with these companies, but I think he's basically an independent contractor who's deciding to do a project with this group, a project with that group, etc. And he's a public figure, you know what I mean? And so I think it's really different. I don't know. I'm a little hesitant to endorse the idea of a clear social media policy from these companies for people like Chuck Wendig, because I can't imagine a scenario in which that's not just a muzzle, you know, unless they're really going to write like a corporate social media policy that says, you know, we are embracing your freedom to share whatever political belief you want. That I doubt that's what the social media policy looks like. So, I don't know that a better situation here, a better result, or whatever, better scenario is Chuck Wendig just never was able to let anybody know how he felt about any of this stuff, you know, because that's probably what it would have been. I don't think it would have been, Chuck, be angry about Bart Kavanaugh, but just don't use swear words. You know what I mean? I don't think that would have been the social media policy, unfortunately. So, and I purposely mispronounced his first name. So, but yeah, you know what I mean? So, so I don't know, but I hear you. It's just, I think the better outcome is don't bow to the pressure of fringe harassment groups online, you know? Yeah.
I mean, that's also good, but that's kind of why I said before, like, support your creators. Yeah. And when they are being harassed, especially, and this was not the case for Chuck Wendig, but especially when they are marginalized groups within the community, which was the case with Heather Antos and Chelsea Kane, and Marvel just essentially threw them under the bus. Yeah.
And I don't want to go any further than into this than just saying like one or two things real quick about it. But like a comparison I would make is like, I think Kanye West sporting the MAGA hat is really, really stupid. I don't know what record label he's on, but I sure don't want them telling him you can't wear that MAGA hat. You know what I mean? Like, he's a creator. His opinions right now, I strongly disagree with, I have to say, but I don't want some corporate, you know, distributor or whatever telling him like, you got to pretend not to support Donald Trump because, you know, I'm sure a lot of people his record company's hearing from a lot of people about the fact that, you know, they don't like that or whatever, and it's probably hurting sales, et cetera, so on and so forth. I don't think the policy should be, you can't say that, Kanye. And you know,
I think his record label boss is Jay-Z.
I don't know if that's the case anymore, but I'm not sure. Yeah, okay, fine.
Like Rockefeller?
I don't think Kanye. I don't know. Whatever. Yes. Well, yeah. I don't even know what the ownership wasn't. Okay. I think we should transition to talking about Chuck's contributions to Star Wars.
Yeah. I mean, also, if you're at this point and you're like, God, why is everything political right now? It's 2018 and this is America. I'm sorry. Like, if this inconveniences your space fantasy podcast, but this is like the reality of it. Like, it's a political time right now. Like, this stuff is like affecting our enjoyment of our dumb space movie stuff. So like, sorry, like, I'd rather be talking like we were 2 episodes ago about how stoked we were for Shadow of Vader and its Friday the 13th homages, and everything's just like dumb and fun. Like, that's what I want, but that is not the reality right now. So sorry.
I think that's very well said. And I you know, I'm going to put a disclaimer on the front of the episode, like just in the show notes. I mean, not like a recorded thing, but just to say like, hey, this is what we talk about a bunch on this episode. So, you know, not everybody's going to be interested in hearing our opinions.
Yeah, which is totally fair too. Fine. Like, there's also like a point of exhaustion with everything in 2018 where like there are points where like I just want to go on IGN and read like a number video game review score, like, because I cannot handle everything else in the world. So I also understand if you save this for a happier time. And you're listening to this now in a very nice apolitical utopia.
Yeah.
where everything just worked out.
Right on. But I do want to make sure, like, let's make sure we spend some time talking about like all the cool stuff Chuck Wendig has done with Star Wars,
Absolutely.
So that's because we're gonna run out of time otherwise. So,
Yeah.
So Ryan, you've made a list here of some of Chuck Wendig's contributions to Star Wars. Some of them I'm familiar with, some of them not so much. The first one is the Force Awakens adaptation for Marvel. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep. I'm also not familiar with this.
Okay, we haven't read that. Okay,
I've not read it, which is really weird because it is like the only, like, I don't know. I never picked this up, and I wasn't subscribed to it, so I just never got it. I never bought it in trade.
And you're a single issue guy for the most part, right? Like
for Star Wars books, yeah. And so I don't know why I don't have it, and why I haven't read it. I bought the Last Jedi single issues just fine. I don't know why I never checked this out, but I looked on Amazon, and it's like you can get a copy shipped for like $5 of the trade. So I am going to do that just because, for one, I want to read it and see Chuck's take on The Force Awakens, and also I'm basically a completionist about Marvel Star Wars comics at this point, so that would be like a huge gap for me not to have. So
okay,
that I'm not familiar with. But the next one, Vader Annual 2, I'm familiar with because, as I talked about on, I think 2 episodes ago, I have been reading the Charles Soule's Darth Vader comic, not in single issue form, unfortunately, but in trade form, because I was not ready for another Vader comic after Kieran Gillen's run. I was ready for the Dr. Aphra comic, but I was not ready for another Vader. So I've just been buying the trades, and it's phenomenal. I should have been there day one for, because like I love Charles Soule, and this book has just been great. But in volume 3, The Burning Seas, we get Chuck Wendig's Annual 2, and it is Technological Terror. And this book has it all. Like, this annual is so good. It's like a, I don't know, like 40 something page story, and it connects, it basically dives into the relationship between Vader and Tarkin, which is also something that Charles Soule had delved into a bit in the ongoing, but also the relationship between Vader, Tarkin, and Krennic. And then there's also some Lyra Urso.
Oh, look, Lyra, back from the dead. Yeah.
That was a good Krennic.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, like there's some of her in there, and there's also like just, and it all connects and like really feels like a connective tissue between Attack of the Clones and Rogue One, which are 2 things I love dearly within Star Wars films. And like it feels like a bridge between those 2 things, and it makes me very happy. And I've read it twice, and I just really, really like it. And the biggest bummer about it is it ends with a, you can see up here, the end ellipsis ? And you could imply that because it's Lyra running off to inform Galen about something, you could like think that it's a lead in to not necessarily Rogue One, but the Catalyst novel, that the prequel novel. Yep. But there's also like some like the dangling threads of the relationship between Krennic and Tarkin and Vader. Like it felt like those could have been expanded on more. And maybe Chuck had plans with that. Maybe it was just to lead into Catalyst, but it's a bummer because now we don't get to find out.
Yeah, that sucks. And yeah, maybe that would have been like the next annual would have picked it up, you know, or something. Yeah. Who knows? But yeah, I haven't read this myself, but I know it's just like, oh, Darth Vader annual, like that's Darth Vader Annual 2. Like that's something I kept hearing about over and over from so many different people. Like,
yeah, when it
made
came
a big
out,
impression.
It made a splash. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. So,
and I think it is because like the way like it connects the prequels, it does something that I think Kieran Gillen's Vader run did really well, which was Darth Vader reminiscing on his time as Anakin Skywalker, and like those flashbacks to the Clone Wars and stuff that he would have. I think like that stuff resonated with me a ton, and like this issue, part of it takes place on Vader goes to Geonosis, and so there's some definite like flashbacks and stuff there. So.
Yeah, people respond well to that stuff, huh? Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
Big Attack of the Clones fan.
Yeah, sure. I'm also a big Attack of the Clones fan, even though it's my least favorite Star Wars movie, but I still, big fan of that. Either way,
it's not even in my top 2 least favorites.
Ooh, whoa, okay.
That's a conversation for another time. I love them. Anyways, let's move on.
Right on. Let's talk about Aftermath.
The
Aftermath trilogy. Now we've both read the entire Aftermath trilogy, and that's that's a series of books, especially the first one, I guess. That there were some major expectations and some varied reactions to that for sure. Like to that book, because there are some Star Wars books that come out that I think are not that great. Weapon of the Jedi that end up like, I think that's the one that it's called, right? Or oh no, now I'm getting concerned because there's the young adult book that is about Luke Skywalker that's really, really good, but there's the full-on adult novel about Luke Skywalker.
I think it's Weapon of the Jedi.
Yeah, not a huge fan, but it came and went. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whereas Aftermath,
Courtship of Princess Leia.
Sure. I don't remember what the reaction was to that one, but yeah, like some of these books that people don't necessarily love, they come and go. Whereas this book or this series of books, I feel like there's a lot of people that didn't love them, and there was a lot of debate and a lot of conversation, and they hung around even though not everybody loved them. I like them quite a bit. They're not my favorite Star Wars novels, but there is a lot about them I appreciate, regardless of if they're my favorite Star Wars novels overall. So I think there's a lot to celebrate.
If we want to talk about like ground zero of shitty Star Wars fans coming after Chuck Wendig, like it is here.
Yes.
It is. Yeah. It is Aftermath Book 1.
Right.
Which is it's a Star Wars book like you've never read before. Like it is absolutely that. It is these it's like a series of vignettes in a way, but there's also like a larger story there. And I will be the first to admit, I did not love Aftermath Book 1. I liked it, and I didn't quite understand where some of the hate was coming from. I understood where some of the hate was coming from, but from like the legitimate like Star Wars fans and the complaints there. But I guess for context, this book, when it released, immediately was swarmed with 1-star Amazon reviews. And that is because it introduced it's not because, but a big factor in this is it introduced the first gay protagonist into Star Wars. And that was the quote unquote, which if you follow anything Star Wars right now, you've heard this a million times, forced diversity. And that was almost the genesis of this. I mean, I guess it probably started with that first trailer for the first teaser for Force Awakens, when people were mad about Finn being a black stormtrooper in John Boyega's role and a female protagonist, and it's all been kind of building from there. But this was another battlefield on this this culture war, I guess. But yeah, the book was like just hit with like 1-star reviews like the moment it released. And because of that, but then like it also was, you know, had a lot of, you know, supporters of Chuck and his work, and supporters of the idea of, you know, gay characters in Star Wars and all of that, giving it like 5-star reviews. And it, you know, kind of ended up a 3-star book on Amazon. But there was also a segment of Star Wars fans who just didn't like the way it was written, which, to be fair, it's weird for a Star Wars book. It jumps around a ton. It has like, you know, it has this kind of I guess like the thread is the Wexley story. And, you know, it's basically the origin of Snap Wexley. But then there's also these like interludes, which are just how are people reacting to, you know, the destruction of the second Death Star. And that manifests in a ton of different ways. But basically, you are in Aftermath Book 1, you are, I don't even know how many characters are in that book when you factor in, you know, the new characters being introduced in the Wexley story, but also like these interludes. And some of them are like, you know, there's a Han Solo and Chewbacca story in there, but then some of them are just like, this is a family that lives on this planet that you've never heard of, and this is how they're reacting to it. So like the amount of characters introduced in the book is insane for a Star Wars book, and, you know, keeping track of everything. It's challenging. And I know a lot of, you know, friends of mine who are fans of Star Wars literature, like really bounced off this book. I think also you mentioned earlier the super high expectations of like, hey, this book is what happens after the Return of the Jedi and how this leads to The Force Awakens, which it's a slow burn to get there. And it doesn't happen in this book. It happens in the next 2 books. But
even then only sort of in small ways though, really, right? I mean, yeah. We were thirsty for like, oh my God, we're going to find out about this sequel trilogy and sort of like where our characters have been all this time. And, you know, it was really, because this book came out before The Force Awakens, right? Like,
yeah, it came out on the day that, like, was it Force Friday?
I don't know, probably, but
yeah, whatever. When the figures released,
right?
And
yeah, it was called Force Friday when the figures. Yeah. So like the expectation was like, oh my God, like we're gonna finally find out more about what's happened in this, like, you know, 30-year period between trilogies. It wasn't that really at all. Even in the end, it wasn't really that. I think
it gave us a lot, though.
I guess so. I mean.
We'll talk about
a lot about the First Order, right? And, you know, yeah, I suppose so. But to me, it's funny, like the idea that you know, oh well, it's written in present tense and as these vignettes, these interludes between chapters is like too much for Star Wars fans to handle. Like, oh my God, it's so unconventional. It's like
there was some quirky writing in there too.
Well, like, I guess. but I mean, to me, it's like, it's a pretty, like, okay, in the Star Wars lexicon or whatever, like, I guess it's a little bit out there, but if you compare it to, like, you know, literature, whatever, in general, it's like super traditional, straightforward
Oh,
book,
totally.
you know, for the most part.
Yeah.
Like, it's not even
But it
anything.
wasn't a traditional Star Wars story.
Yeah. Yeah. And I get that. I get that. And it, again, like, my issue is, like, I thought it was more violent than a Star Wars book, you know, would generally be that I would prefer. But yeah, but I don't know. It's, you know, it's a good book, and as a whole trilogy, you know, I certainly enjoyed it. So but as you pointed out, first gay Star Wars protagonist, which is great. I thought that was cool. Obviously placed a target on Chuck Wendig's back from the word go. So that led to a lot of issues, but there's a bunch of other cool stuff that you've listed here too that's part of the Aftermath series as well.
Yeah, and I do want to jump into that, but I also want to acknowledge the, like, kind of final reason why this book felt so contentious at the time. And I think it didn't help that it was released on the same day as arguably the best Star Wars book of all time, which is Lost Stars by Claudia Gray. I mean, I think that is the book that, like, I mean, it spans the entire saga, and it's such a beautiful story. It's my favorite Star Wars book ever. I think it's, you know, I don't think Star Wars fans were expecting much from that book. It was a young adult book from an author who had never written Star Wars before, who has now become one of, like, Star Wars' favorite authors. But, like, that was released alongside Aftermath, and I think that was more of, like, what a lot of us just as fans wanted. And I mean, it is, like, it's not to take away anything from Lost Stars, because, like I said, it is my favorite Star Wars book ever. But, like, that left a weird place for Aftermath. But as we would find out, Aftermath was part of something much, much bigger, and would go on to introduce so much stuff into Star Wars. Like, it really does tell a lot. I mean, and we're not going to give, like, spoilers here, but just kind of talking in broad strokes about what the Aftermath series is about and what it brings to the table is, you know, like we've mentioned, first gay Star Wars protagonist, which is cool. And also it does chronicle the rise of the First Order. It's not maybe in the way, like, any of us were expecting it, but, you know, it really does go through, like, how could this happen? Like, how could Force Awakens happen? And it, you know, it describes, like, the you know, the First Order building their army in the, I always forget this, outer regions?
Unknown regions.
Yeah.
Unknown regions.
And then, like, the stockpiles on Jakku, and how, like, that planet ended up being, you know, very important, and all of that, like, with the secrets on Jakku.
Yeah, that stuff is really cool, and I really enjoyed that, especially as the books progressed. I think the devil's advocate argument there is that, like, it presented this antagonist in Gallius Rax that, like, in the end of the day, like, you know, was sort of conceived and removed just within the span of this series of books, just for the purpose of creating a villain for this series of books. So it's like, oh, well, did I learn anything about Snoke? No. Did I learn anything about, like, you know, most of the characters? Like, not really. But then again, it's not really a realistic expectation, because they're not going to give that stuff away while they're still telling the story of the sequels on film. And I wouldn't really want them to either. And I enjoyed the Gallius Rax stuff, and I think it was interesting that they kept us guessing too. Like, is that Snoke at the end of Aftermath?
Yeah.
Like, is it somebody else? Like, I think all that stuff was great, you know? So, I enjoyed that quite a bit, but I would say to anybody listening or viewing who's like, well, at the end, we didn't learn that much about a lot of important stuff, like with the First Order. I would kind of agree with that. Everything on Jakku is really cool. Do I think I'm ever going to hear about it in a movie, in a Star Wars movie? No. You know what I mean? So it's like, well, it is what it is. I
mean, 99% of humans' dissatisfaction with being dissatisfied with Star Wars comes from not learning more about Snoke. That is the entirety of the complaints against The Last Jedi.
I don't really want to learn more.
People just want more Snoke, especially in the month of Snoketober.
Yeah, Snoketober. Shout out to Blast Points. I am loving Snoketober. Yeah. But no. I mean, like, I just would compare Aftermath to, say, Catalyst. Catalyst was billed as like this book that's going to really fill you in on a lot about Rogue One. And guess what? It did. I read Catalyst and I was like, whoa, I'm way more prepared to watch Rogue One. I read Aftermath and I was like, huh, interesting. It's a story that's tangentially connected to this new series of films, but in a very small way. And again, I understand why that's the case. I don't think that's Chuck Wendig's fault. In fact, I think Chuck Wendig told a pretty compelling story over the course of 3 books without being able to rely on making big connections to the sequel trilogy. But I don't think the big connections are really there. And again, I don't think Chuck Wendig promised that they would be, or that, he failed in creating them. I think it's just the nature of the secrecy around the sequel trilogy, which I support. I support that secrecy around the sequel trilogy.
Yeah. We did, however, get a ton about Hux in this, though. And I think that definitely informed the way I view Hux in the films, knowing, like, everything with his father, which is, chronicled here. It also, like, is a great companion. The Aftermath books are a great companion piece to Phasma as well, because I think that was one of the more interesting parts about Phasma was, General Hux's father and his, quest for power within the First Order and his, way of doing things. Which also leads to, like, an interesting, when you're watching the films, the contention between Kylo Ren and Hux in the films. So I do think, like, it definitely enriched that element for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to need to start wrapping up here pretty quickly, but you've got something on here, Ryan, that's maybe my favorite part of the Aftermath trilogy, and it's something that is kind of it's understood differently depending on who you're talking to. But the interlude about Jar Jar Binks, I think, was brilliant, and I think it was a beautiful, touching, made me cry tribute to a great character, Jar Jar Binks. I know there's other people that think it disrespects Jar Jar Binks, that it's mean-spirited. I didn't get that one little bit. I thought it was totally a tribute to Jar Jar. I thought it understood everything about Jar Jar that made Jar Jar great, and the way Chuck kind of wrapped up Jar Jar's story there, where he placed him and what his purpose in life was, what he was doing. I thought it was a great tribute. So to me, that's something I really appreciate. I thought he did an amazing job with that. So again, I know some people feel the exact opposite, like it was a slap in the face to Jar Jar, but personally, I feel like that's what you want to find there, if that's how you're interpreting it. Because to me, yes, it's a sad ending, but a tragic ending, even from a certain perspective. But just because a character story ends in tragedy doesn't mean the author, disrespects or dislikes that character. It means that's the story that ought to be told in that situation. So I love that.
I mean, I remember, I don't remember if that was in Life Debt or Empire's End.
Yeah.
Because all of the books kind of like come together to me, because they do form a very cohesive story once you like actually put them together. But I remember, like, I was not expecting that. And then I remember like reading that chapter twice, because like it is like pretty impactful, and I thought it was wonderful. And there's the series is full of those like Like there's the bigger story, which is wonderful, but those vignettes are so great.
Shout out to the Acolytes of Beyond. I thought that was really cool. Those interludes, you remember those? They were like the Vader obsessed,
yes,
hunting down artifacts and stuff. Like I thought that stuff was really cool. Although that's where some of the big time violence came in too, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah.
But no, I thought that stuff was great.
I love the family where like the two brothers, like one is on the side of the rebellion, one is on the side of the Empire, and the dad is just like, I've seen all this before. Like it's never going to end. Like who cares? Like you just have to be good to people. Like stop arguing and bickering, which is, I mean, that's it's a nice notion in 2018. It's something to think about, but I think there's a time and a place for fighting and bickering, and there's a time and a place to respect each other, and the two are not mutually exclusive. But I think that was one of the most powerful bits in the Aftermath series.
I agree. Okay, Ryan, unfortunately, I've got to go pretty quickly. So anything else you wanted to say about Aftermath that we haven't gotten to here?
Ray Sloan.
Yeah, more Ray Sloan. So he didn't create Ray Sloan, but
no, that was in John Jackson Miller's New Dawn.
Yeah.
But he definitely gave us more Ray Sloan, and she's so great. Also, the origin of Snap Wexley.
Yeah.
Essentially, which was not what I expected that character to be. And that was not the humble beginnings I expected for him. So,
plus a little almost love story for Wedge Antilles, right? Is that Aftermath?
Nora.
Yeah. Pretty cool series of books. And
if you haven't read them, like, especially now, like they're so good.
Yeah, they're ambitious, which is cool. I mean, it's ambitious for him to take on like a Star Wars novel. It's really ambitious, I think, for a first-time Star Wars novelist to be like, yeah, I'm going to write 3 of these things in a trilogy, and it's going to be the one that's in some ways at least kind of slotted in between the original trilogy and the sequel trilogy. And I mean, it's a big, ambitious project, and there's so much cool stuff about it, I feel like. And
he also like really, really kept his voice in it. Like this is like... It's jarring, like it's admittedly jarring at first, but once you kind of roll with it, like these are Star Wars books that are nothing like Star Wars books, and they do altogether tell like a great story and taking on their own merits today, like well worth checking out. Can you tell us about You Might Be the Killer in 90 Seconds or Less, Ryan? Yes, I watched it today. It is based off a Twitter conversation between Chuck Wendig and another writer, Sam Sykes. And it is a take on 80s slasher films based off this completely random Twitter conversation they had. And it's a super fun movie that is available on demand if you have sci-fi. And it's a great watch during Halloween month. Nice. I was not aware of this until... I think you'd like it. Today. Yeah? I think you would like it, yeah. What's the violence level? It's... Have you ever watched a Friday the 13th movie? Yes, I have watched probably all of them, except for the remake. Yeah. There you go. Okay. All right. I can handle that. Yeah. But I don't watch Saw movies. It's not like Saw? It is not like Saw. It is like a lovingly crafted homage to the slasher films that you and I grew up on. Yeah. And all the tropes intact. But also like poking fun at that, but also having its own twist. And there's some great performances as well by people who are like obviously having a ton of fun making this very silly movie. Nice. So, yes. Cool. Yeah. All right. Well, we got to wrap up here. So thanks very much for listening and for watching. Check out more of our stuff at blockaderunnerpodcast.com.
definitely subscribe on iTunes or your podcast catcher of choice. While you're there, we'd love if you would leave us a review. And if you want to leave us feedback of another kind, you can email us at blockaderunnerpodcast@gmail.com.
Yeah, and if you're leaving reviews, like, and if you're like mad about this whole episode, don't start with like the 1-star stuff. Like, let's just send us an email. We'll talk it out. We can hash it out at Celebration. Like, I neither of us have time for all this like online crap. So, just throwing that out there. We'll buy you a beer and you can tell us how much you hate our podcast at Celebration. That is a promise. But like, don't get into like all the online crap with us because we just don't have time for it.
Fair enough. Yeah, I'm on Twitter at, or I guess the show is on Twitter at Blockade Run. Ryan, you're on Twitter at Braun Dwarf.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And you know what, Chuck Wendig, we love the work that he has contributed to Star Wars so far. Both pretty grossed out about how things have gone down. So this episode was our attempt to sort of make that clear that that it's pretty gross how everything
not
shook
okay
out. Not okay, not okay. Cool. And also to try to take some time to appreciate the things that Chuck has contributed to Star Wars thus far. And we hope to see him back again doing some more Star Wars work sometime soon. Probably not at Marvel, which is okay. But hopefully he can continue to contribute to Star Wars in other ways. And I'm going to keep following him on Twitter because I feel like, his perspective is it is his, he's not pulling any punches. He's being honest and real on Twitter. And, I appreciate that. And like I said, we definitely appreciate his contributions to Star Wars. So with that being said, until next time, thanks again for listening and or viewing. And we'll be back very soon with more Blockade Runner podcast.
Later.